Hello, everybody. How we doing today? Happy New Year. It is, I believe, the 3rd of January today. I had a gig New Year's Eve. Got home at 4 in the morning, and I kind of messed my sleep schedule up for the next couple of days. I'm an old man. When I'm used to being up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, it ain't so hard. But man, I couldn't sleep well when I got home. Ended up spending most of Saturday in and out of nap time. And yesterday I spent with my wife, where she went back to work for a couple of weeks here, where she's working a lot, which is good for us. But the time away isn't great. But I'm home alone right now. The kid's back in school. The wife's at work. The husky's out in the pen, standing on top of the pool, about 5 feet up in the air, surveying the landscape over the ice floes. It is Minnesota after all. But I hope everyone had a great New Year's Eve and was safe. And I hope 22 goes well. I want to thank everyone for the well wishing and all those who have sent gifts and helped out and been Patreon supporters this last year through the holidays. Thank you so much. I had a friend reach out the other day through my channel and offered to help me get a gym membership. And that's just so awesome. I need that. I need to get back in shape. I'm too heavy. Since I moved from the Twin Cities out here 2 years ago, I haven't had access to a gym. I can't play on concrete like I used to. My knees can't take it. And so to have a gym membership, even though it's going to be 30 minutes away, I need to get in shape. I'm almost 50, you know. So, bottom of my heart, thank you to everybody. You all have been very great, very supportive. In waiting for my gig right before it happened, I was watching some documentaries on the world wars, and the first one was the factories of World War II. It was an 8-part thing about the industrial aspects of the Second War, and it's mind-numbing, the numbers, the manufactured weapons of war, and how all the decisive things, that the battles weren't what decided the outcomes. It was the manufacturing of goods and the manufacturing American potential, being fresh in the war and having all these factories that were away from the carpet bombing. It was really sealed in stone. But the numbers are just shocking. The number, millions of items and the tens of thousands of planes, and then I watched another one on World War One, which was World War One by the numbers. I think it was in 6 parts, and maybe 5. But they kind of give you year by year synopsis of what's happening from the gas attacks of, was it 15 or 16, and how the trenches kind of got dug in right away, and how millions of men died over acres. The lines hardly moved for years, and it took the invention of the tank and the fresh American troops, and of course the famous Canadian battle at Vimy Ridge, which is something we're very much proud of and taught about in Canada. It's one of our pieces of heritage up there, and I believe one of the Canadian generals said we became a nation at Vimy Ridge. It brought together a bunch of immigrants, which is what Canada was and still is, and what America is too, which Americans seem to forget a lot. We're all immigrants from somewhere else, and for the most part, all humans are immigrants from somewhere else. The migration's complete and total. Everyone's come from somewhere else at some point. There is no native indigenous people controlling and occupying the land continuously for millennia. It's just not really. You can live in the same river valley for 2,000 years, but armies have come in and helped mingle those genes. You know, sadly, no matter how you want to look at it, and the shocking aspect of the whole war thing is these boys died by the millions. You know, and World War One, I found even more disgusting in a way, even though there's kind of a continuation between the wars, they're kind of the same storyline, and it might be the worst 30 years in human history. The aristocrats of Europe, the colonial kings and the empire rulers of Austria-Hungary and the czars in Russia and the German control and the British and the French, these aristocrats are so disconnected from the peasantry, from the poor, impoverished people that were literally just pawns. And when you see in the beginning of the war how they're all marching with their drums and their colored uniforms, and it was a game. And there was kind of a code that was supposed to be upheld, but that code quickly got thrown out the window as desperation and the craziness set in. And it's by the numbers World War One. So they start adding up the standing armies and the reserves and the call-ups of each side, and the numbers are in the millions. And there was battles and fronts where there was 1.5 million versus 1.2 million. These numbers are just staggering. Wars where 1 or 2 million shells were bombed in one battle before the troops were called out of the trenches. 1 million shells in an 8-mile. It's insane numbers. It's just so hard to really grasp and comprehend it. And of course, by the end of the war, the Russians are in complete revolution. There's German mutinies, there's French mutinies. Some of the troops are calling their own generals killers and murderers and monsters. And you were just pretty much sheep to the fodder. You were being fed to the cannons. And the machine guns were just cutting these kids down. And it was all a belief in nationality and the preservation of some arbitrary flag. And we're kind of inbred that stuff by our leaders to keep us loyal and to prevent us from thinking bigger than my own neighborhood and backyard. And that's the thing that's so shocking to me, it's so disturbing to me, is this idea of being a person from a nation. Even, the British, you guys are a hodgepodge of invading groups. The Italians, the French, the Germans, there's no purity or homogenous anything. It's such a mishmash of human sexuality. And if you had any grasp of your own history, it only takes a few centuries for the lines of that map are so different that how can it have any bearing on how you perceive yourself? How can you allow it to shape who you think you are without there being a great deal of miseducation and lack of education? Because with the perspective of history, with the perspective of understanding how that migration and that integration works, human earthling is all you can be. And it's not open for debate. And unless you think of the Chinese heritage as part of your heritage, and the Aborigine heritage as part of your heritage, and the people of the Maasai and the shadows of Kilimanjaro as being your heritage, and the Germans and the French and the British and the Turks, the human story is ours, so my story. I can't detach from that. I don't live in a bubble of isolation, nor does my people, nor does my nation. And my people is all people. And it's a philosophical thing that you get from studying history and geography. I know geography really well, the lines of the map, when they change, and how little they can define us. And I've said this on the channel before. When you cross from Algeria into Libya, the language didn't change. The religion didn't change. The desert sure didn't change. The food didn't change. Race doesn't. What changes when you cross a border instantly is economics. How much a tank of gas costs, how much a cup of coffee costs. Those borders represent economic division. Not racial, not cultural, not language, not religion. They represent economics. And different systems of economics can't coexist, which puts them at odds against each other. And the small-mindedness of nationality allows us to sign up to be fed to the machine guns. Oh, I got to protect my British way of thinking. I got to protect that American way of doing things. We all do things the same way. We all want our kids fed. We all want food on the table at night. We want to feel safe when we turn the lights out. There's no difference. There's no group of people who are right and everybody else is wrong. That's such an antiquated, an asinine way of thinking. And if you live in a world where you rarely crossed over that river there and that sea there, that mountain range, we've never been over across that. The small-mindedness of region can take foothold and be justified, at least explained. But in a day where we've seen our planet from space, and we see the interconnectedness of how we all need to coexist, and when we put some of us at risk, we all are at risk, environmentally, socially, economically. There can't be this division of nationalism. Nationalism is the most stupid of all divides. What nation you come out of a vagina in only is telling you who you can cheer for at the Olympics. Beyond that, it doesn't tell you nothing. It doesn't define your race or your language or your culture. None of those things are defined by nation. those things all bleed and shift and have pockets. A language map looks nothing like the world's countries. A religion map looks nothing like the world's countries. Race, no sir. But if you want to put a map of currency and economics on the continents, we get the countries of the world. Is that worth fighting for? Is that worth dying for? And the aristocrats were such monsters who with such little humanity or connection to their own masses. And I think it was 1/3 of men 18 to 23 in Europe and England were slaughtered. It's an astounding thing. And it turns my stomach, but it's important to understand it. Like I said, I've always been a history, geography guy. And to see how these boys were willing to sign up to die to protect what they think is their flag and their heritage, but it's not. And the brainwash of nationality it's shameful that we even have issue with it still today. Because your nation ain't really doing a lot for you. You know, and maybe if you live in Sweden or Denmark, you can make a claim that my nation does take care of us on a different kind of level. But those main participants in the war didn't give any regard for the millions of men that they sent off to war, and then the women they hired for the factories and then took their jobs from them after the war. And it's just such a barbaric and greed-driven mentality. And obviously most of those colonial aristocrats lost their power by the end of the war. And in my way of seeing it, there's a new arising power in the world. The churches have subsided. The colonial powers, the kings, they're now been dealt their hand. And capitalism and the industrialists are the new force. And we're going to manipulate things ourselves so we don't have to answer to you people. You are old way of thinking, old way of doing, and we're just going to pump enough weapons in there so you all knock each other off. And it's not a nation behind it. It's an ideology, economic system. And out of that economic system and a rising of the manipulation of the worker and the factory and all this incredible manufacturing, there comes a balance to that with the communists arising. And of course, that ideology is again at odds with the capitalist mentality. And in my mind, the capitalists saw this new Russian threat at the end of the First War. And it's really risky to have Germany unable to defend itself just in terms of communist expansion. It makes Europe very vulnerable. And I think the capitalist industrialists had to be very well aware of that. And a Germany falling to the Soviets in the 1920s or 30s would have been very bad for the outcome of our trade partners and networks. And so I think in a larger scale, 100, 200, 300 years from now, you're going to see these world wars as the industrialists defeating the colonial powers, stripping them of their powers, and then the capitalists confronting the communists, and the rise of socialism and the rise of the unions and the workers, which didn't really fit our plan. We just fought this massive war, used slavery, massive wars of occupation to take over the world's resources. And now all these workers want to have a piece of the pie. It wasn't part of the plan. We have sacrificed the lives of millions to control this. We're not about to give you a bunch of it back. And I think, again, I'm generalizing. But out of all that, I came away with this incredible peace of mind that in my almost 50 years of walking this planet, I've not had to live through that. I've not had to live through the terror of what the European continent went through twice. And the American boys who went over and served were exposed to that terror. The American people themselves never really saw it outside from the newspaper. And it's not the same as having your factory in your city leveled and burnt to the ground. It's just not the same. Canadians honestly suffered more than the Americans. Canadians go for war the day after England does in both wars. Like we're like right there. And so we suffered more, but we still didn't have it come on our shores. It doesn't touch our soil. So there's a detachment there. And that suffering in Europe is what led to that great baby boom generation of musicians that came up and had such a soul and a depth to them because of the darkness that they experienced and the loss of their fathers. And it's a painful, terrible terrifying experience, these wars. And the civilian death tolls are just insane. And the black experience in America is still wrapped up in all of this. In both wars, blacks were drafted very unequally. In World War I, the rich could buy their way out of the draft. The black was drafted and taken into the conflict at a much higher rate and percentage than their white counterparts. And they were uncomfortable commingling black and white troops. So many blacks ended up in subservient backup roles, kind of being crews that were working on the planes and the machinery and all that. But there was also some black divisions that went and fought, and they had to suppress those black troops from going out in Europe because they were experiencing a freedom, even during war and conflict, in the French cafes and the Belgian restaurants. They were being treated with a dignity and a humanity that they weren't getting at home. And the Jazz Age, especially during World War II, is in full swing. But even in World War I, there's Earl James, Europe. Well, I said that wrong. It's early morning, sorry. But there was already the roots of jazz happening. And that music was starting to spread across the world. And that powerful message of black exploitation and the oppression that these blacks experienced in America for centuries makes a lot of America's claims of freedom and justice and liberty dead on arrival. You can't convince me that that's part of your MO. That's partly how you see things as a liberator of men and freedom. When you've enslaved and tortured and executed and incarcerated and oppressed and kept down even after civil rights movements and it's insane. The lack of equality the American black man has ever received in this country. And they ended up suppressing the blacks from going out to bars and restaurants, lest they got too much of a taste for freedom and equality, and it created unease in the ranks. And when they came back to America, they didn't want them being too aware of how unjust things were back home. You shouldn't have to consider those things when you're already taking these men's lives and putting them at risk. That should be enough for them to come home and be like, okay, we're not going to make you live that way anymore. But like I said, this whole thing filled me with a calm and a peace and a thankfulness. And COVID's been tough. It's been a stressful couple years. There's been a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. But the terror of these two wars, the scale, the lack of human dignity, sending 1 million men over a wall, over a trench, to get just mowed down by machine guns. And you make that mistake once as a general, okay, you didn't know. But to do it for years, and the death toll is just unforgivable. It's unforgivable. There's no way that you can sleep at night slaughtering millions of your own countrymen, not to mention the enemy you're killing. It's just appalling. But I'll be honest, I was a little surprised by how late in the war the Americans come in the First World War. They're late to the party in World War II, but World War I, they're very much there in a sweep-up role. They're not really, and like I said, history's going to change how we see these things. And we all know that one of the great lessons in history is if I want to occupy or overcome an enemy, the best thing to do is set it at odds with another enemy of theirs and have them fight it out, and then come in and take both people's pie. And on some level, that's exactly what happens. The capitalist West and again, the American government's not behind it. The American government's not perceptive of it even. Even the president, Wood Wilson, they don't see this manipulation happening. But I think in time, the history books will definitely reduce it down to the capitalists, industrialists taking over, not having to answer to the colonial powers and kings. They didn't want to. They felt they didn't need to. And now the European powers all lost their colonies, and they basically all have become vassal states of this new American empire. And the American military is stationed throughout the world, if you have any questions about that. Someday, 500 years from now, the map of present will show the American Empire and all those places where we have Navy bases and Air Force bases and Army bases. In any other century, that's how it works. That's what it looks like. And even though you never in your own time understand the history you live in, but again, the lines in the map are telling the story that nation isn't what it's about. It's about economic ideology. It's about greed. It's about power and control. And the boys who died for a nation, sheep to the slaughter. And don't be in that mindset. You know, it's as a jazz shepherd, don't be a sheep. You can definitely be a jazz sheep, you know, but the records were the sheep. It was never the people that were the sheep in my mind. The records was what I'm shepherding, my jazz collection, you know, for my perspective. It's had a nice duality to it. I'll agree, but I just think it's important to say this stuff. I just think it's important to understand that it's out of this type of struggle and pain that we can come to a place where we make this kind of music. It takes incredible struggle to make the blues. The blues can't come from happiness and perfection and ease. The blues comes out of tyranny and terror. You know? And I was watching Rick Beato, great channel on Facebook. I watch him quite a bit. And him and a couple of his buddies were talking about the death of rock and roll in the mid-90s. And as autotune comes around and all the correcting in the grid, make everything rigid, the off notes and the bent notes and all the stuff that the blues is about. That sour, stressful note that creates that tension. That's what the blues is kind of, it lives there. And part of, they touched on this at times, how the blues is about that struggle and that pain. But part of what's lacking in the pop music today, especially in America, is a lot of these kids haven't really seen struggle. And so you have Juice WRLD synthesizing his depression and his pill popping and his and the guy's dead. You know, a lot of these kids today from the pop scene are dead, shockingly way too young. But had you had a real struggle in your life, these little manufactured crises wouldn't have place to take root. You know, and pop music today is just lacking that soul of the blues, the real earthiness of a struggle. And again, Rick Beato, these guys touched on the Black experience, but they didn't really dive into it. And they kind of, you know, skirted a little bit. And the Black experience in America has fueled art around the world. How we sing and how we phrase and how we feel a groove and the sexual pulse of music, so much of it has been brought to us by the Black experience in America. And it can't be understated. It can't be glossed over. And I can't help but watch some documentaries like this and get a little bit of a preacher in me, a little bit of an indignation, a righteous indignation. Shame on you, aristocrats. Shame on you. The cosmos will forgive if you kill out of need. There's forgiveness. You're not guaranteed it, but you could possibly find it. If you kill out of greed, there's no cosmic power anywhere in this universe that's going to say you deserve happiness. You kill for greed, you don't need it, but you still did it. Judgment will come. And that's the message of Bob Marley and the message of a lot of the jazz cats even, and Rage Against a lot of these bands that have something to say, is that if you're the big tree, as Bob Marley said, we are the small axe, sharpened to cut you down. Because history knows what you did. The people know what you did. You can't hide the blood. And it will come back and haunt your seeds. This stuff is all cyclical. And so those aristocratic families, the corporate industrialists who profit from war, you guys have some ugly harvests coming. I promise you. You have some ugly harvests coming. And the depression and suicide of today's kids is a byproduct of that end result. And sadly, it goes to the population as much as it does to the aristocrats. But the rich gentry of the land have a lost generation of children. It's a really sad time and place. So I just had to talk on that a little bit because it means a lot to me. And my parents were both born in Europe during the war. My dad was born in Holland in '43 during Nazi occupation in Leerdam. My mom was born in London in '45. And throughout my life, my dad used to joke how for a lot of people they break the mold. For you, they bombed the hospital, which is what happened. The hospital got bombed like 20 minutes after my mom left the hospital in London in '45. But the stories of the London blackout and then the sirens and the fear and the terror and the explosions going off. I remember seeing my grandma turn pale, and she couldn't even hardly speak on it. And my mom's dad, who fought in the Second War, I think he was mostly just a surveyor, but he still saw some ugly stuff at the front lines. You know, they can't speak about it. But as a kid, you can feel their terror and their throats clench up. And so we have a lot to be thankful for. And so that includes our mopey children who don't want to get off their bed and don't want to put their controller down, just want to sit there zombified, miserable. They aren't appreciating what the sacrifices that were made for them to live as free as they are. And yet they've still been pulled back into this kind of mental slavery. Thoughts of nationality and sitting there controlling by the social media. And boy, those men sacrificed a lot for this. That's a lot got sacrificed for this end result. And we can't even really put a school system together and keep clean water to the people. And I'm done with left and right politics. That's fool's banter. I'm done with that. I'm not going to debate with left or right. You know, especially some of the right evangelicals. But the left gets extreme as well. And you're both guilty of not finding unity with all that division. You know, you find polarity in every subject that comes up. Somehow we get into this polarity, and there can be no construct, no positive out of that. And that's by design. They want us so powerless and castrated because we can't agree on a damn thing. And I live now in very much red America here in the country. And I pretty much DJ most of my life in blue America, the city, in a very urban setting. A lot of African Americans at my gigs, playing a lot of African American music. Now I'm very much in a red state area in this rural setting here. I'm thinking about DJing at this new restaurant opening up across the street, and I'll be playing for Red America versus Blue America. And it's a pretty different person, even in what they listen to musically. It's much more country and certain classic rock, and you know they like that Leonard Skinner and Johnny Cash. And it would be a different thing DJing for Red America, but it's something I still think it's right there. I can literally see it right now. And if I can get them to give me even a decent paycheck for doing it, I'm going to dabble in it, I think. But enough on that. I just felt it had to be said. And once in a while, I need to get some of this out. And that's part of what I do sometimes is I get on my pulpit and preach a little bit. My dad was a pastor, was raised by evangelicals. Unfortunately, for some of you maybe, I am not claiming any religion. I don't see how any creator would choose one people. If you created this, all people would be your people. All walks of life, all faith should be a way trying to define me. If I'm the creator, I should love all of that. And so how can all my followers be so, we're the only ones, you guys aren't. He's looking down going, you ain't that special, buddy. I didn't choose just you. I didn't just choose your people. I don't like just sand people. I don't like just water people. Don't like just cold people. I made all y'all. If I'm the creator, I'm waiting for that philosophy and that social movement ideology to take root. And it should take root with what we know. But there's great manufacturing of ideas that prevents us from seeing that light. That prevents us from looking at our heritage as human and taking pride in the accomplishments of all humanity and seeing it as part of my heritage. If we thought that way and were educated that way, we wouldn't tolerate 90% of what the rich are doing. But because we think so regional, we're like only concerned with what happens to me in my group. And so you're not oppressing me and my people right now with this, so I don't really care what you do to them. I kind of hate them anyway. And I hate them because I'm scared of them. And you know why I'm scared of them? Because I don't understand them. You know why I don't understand them? Because I haven't taken the time to learn about them. They keep us dumb. They keep us dumb, staring at our phones and our Kardashians and our. It's foolishness. I am going to move on. I promise. We're going to talk about Blue Note a little bit. One of the things that's interesting about Blue Note is I just pulled 6 records here, and the experience that these black men went through in America in the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s is similar. Without question. It's a similar experience that they're all going to be going through. However, their personalities do a lot to dictate how they're going to interpret that struggle. And from the same era, cut from very similar cloths, you have 2 of the greatest trumpet players in jazz. You have Lee Morgan and Donald Byrd. And I could be listening to Spotify, whatever, YouTube, or have a record on, forget what I'm playing, I'm over there working on something, making a trading card. And I'm like, ooh, I like that trumpet. And I forget what I'm listening to even sometimes. I'm like, there's no mistaking Lee Morgan for Donald Byrd. They sound very different. And there's times where I'm like, okay, I know that's not Lee Morgan. I might not know it's Donald Byrd, but I know it's not Lee Morgan. And there's times where I hear Lee Morgan, and I'm like, that's some fire. I wonder who that is. And it's not Art Farmer. It's not Miles Davis. It's not even Clifford Brown because it's got a different tonality. It's not Freddie Hubbard because Freddie Hubbard's got that crystal. And so you kind of by reduction go, okay, that kind of emotional outpouring leaves it only a few guys it can be. Oh, that's probably Lee Morgan. And Lee Morgan and Donald Byrd are both fantastic players. But their tonality, their approach towards their experience is what makes them such different sounding players. Their environment was the same for the most part. And they have personal experience that's going to change that environment from different wives and children, different addictions. All those things are going to play a role, your experience. But your personality, it's largely that personality that makes Byrd and Morgan sound so different from each other. And like I said, Byrd doesn't have that same aggression. Byrd is a little bit more of a resolve that we're going to make things work somehow. Hank Mobley has that often. Sonny Clark, who I've talked about a lot on this channel, to me is as militant a black man as there is in this time, along with guys like Max Roach. Charlie Mingus. Mingus, part of his anger is how he feels about being a black man in America. Let's not make any mistake about it. If you're some Republican, conservative-minded person and you think, oh, Mingus is so fantastic, he wouldn't have been a fan of you. He wasn't a big fan of white people, period. And Black Saint and Sinner Lady, what's that saying? He's saying that I can be as innocent a black man as possible. I can be a black saint. But if I'm with a white woman, she becomes a sinner lady in your eyes. And it makes me furious. Mingus wasn't a happy-go-lucky cat. Mingus's reaction to his experience as a black man was very resentful, very angry. And if you're not picking that up, you're not really hearing the man. And so personality is such an important brushstroke to help us hear what a player is saying. And tonality is a great way to get to know personality. The intensity of how you create your embouchure, the amount of force you blow out, all those things are kind of indicators. And I think the best way, obviously, is to take 5 or 6 photographs of the guy. Donald Byrd, there's kind of a calmness in those eyes. Lee Morgan, there's a bit of a wild man in those eyes. Tell me you don't see it. You know what I mean? And you have 5 photographs of any of those jazz cats, and you'll get to know something about that guy's personality. It's pretty crystal clear. Sonny Clark, militancy is the word that comes to mind with him. And that's a Bob Marley look. That's John Lennon and Bob Dylan in their most intense moments. And I swear so much of the Blue Note canon from 58, 59, the most intense, aggressive, full-fledged hard bop sounds and records are absolutely led by Sonny Clark, even when he's a sideman. He's just a side piano player. What he's bringing to that session is just a fury and a focus. And I feel like he was a great teacher as well. Not so much about the notes and the chords and the scales. I feel like he was a great teacher of social values. And he was talking to the other young kids and being kind of that leader, saying, there's change afoot. There's been so much sacrifice made. He struggled with drugs himself. They were being dumped into black neighborhoods. It's a shocking time. And this music's happening during these wars. This music is being changing because of these wars. And the saccharine nature of what swing music becomes, especially by the Second World War, is in a direct relationship to the struggle for survival that the war was. Glenn Miller was a medication. It was soft and creamy and sweet, and it helped us kind of forget our boys and our cousins and our husbands being over in the killing fields. And Glenn Miller is a definite response to that tension and that desperation. And the aggression of the jazz messengers would not have flown in 1939, 30, 40, 41. You needed Glenn Miller's soft trombone or Pennsylvania, whatever the numbers are. I can't think of it right now. I love that song. It's so saccharine because it needed to be. We need songs about moonlights and serenades and just a softer edge. Rollins makes some of his better records at Blue Note here in 57 and 58. And Rollins' career, he's not very much of a label-centric guy. He records on a lot of contemporaries at Riverside. He's at Prestige. He's probably as much a Prestige guy as anything. His Blue Note records, though, are outstanding. There's 4 total. This live one is, it's actually quite a bit different than his other records, Blue Note Volume 1, 2. This one is a fairly intense live recording. I think it has 2 different rhythm sections from 2 different nights, if my memory serves. Wilbur Ware and Elvin Jones, and then Donald Bailey and Pete LaRocca. And so you certainly have slightly different, but you don't really, it's not that perceptible at all. And what you have, though, is Rollins with all kinds of time to express. And he dives in, he goes deep. And this is one of the most expressive and possibly most agitated sounding Rollins records that there is. And I would argue being part of that Blue Note stable for a couple of years, being around those Blue Note, the blackness of Blue Note. And when you're in a room of only black men, which is what Blue Note was most of the time, especially by 55, 56, there's no more white recordings at Blue Note after 56. J.R. Montrose is like the last one. Eula Hip does some things in 55, but by 56, it's just black men. And so the conversations that we're going to have while we're smoking a break, having a cigarette, it's going to be different than if there's a couple white cats there. It just is. Believe it. And Prestige also had the white cats there, the white drug addicts. They needed to get their money as well. Riverside does quite a few white cats. Most of the labels have a fairly mixed bag of musicians. And so you might have some black guys recording in Studio 1, but Studio 2 is going to have a white guy playing some organ. And so the things you're going to say as a black man around a couple white guys in the room are going to be a little bit more carefully chosen. But if it's just a bunch of black guys sitting there talking about civil rights and the strife and the conflicts and the war and all these things, there's going to be an unfiltered honesty there. And even a guy like Rollins comes in there and it leaves an impact. A guy like Sonny Clark, like Lee Morgan, they get in your head, and there's a truth to it. And even the guys who are softer in their approach and their personality or less focused and aggressive, when you get exposed to that evangelism of some of those more militant-minded guys, they can get you riled up and going. And you hear a guy like Mobley being very different playing with Lee Morgan versus when he played with Art Farmer. Mobley can be very much a chameleon in that sense. Curtis Fuller, he's one of the great players of this era as well. And we're basically here in 57, looking at some of the most incredible Blue Note records ever. This is about Sonny Clark, Art Farmer, George Tucker, and Louis Hayes. Louis Hayes is a young Detroit drummer. George Tucker's a great bass player. Farmer's one of the great unheralded, softer tone trumpet players. He doesn't get as much credit as he really deserves. And he actually does quite a bit of sound work at Blue Note in 57, 58. And he doesn't get anything as a leader because he's under contract at Prestige and other places. But Farmer's a great player. And he can really carry a lovely, soft tone. and has a patience to his playing that's really wonderful. But for the most part, these records are layered with aggressive tempos and fiery personalities, and even some of the less fiery personalities are being fired up by the more fiery personalities. And these records are a direct relationship to the Black experience. Art can't be made in a vacuum. Art's never not reflecting the times that it's made in. And I know this stuff I've talked about on this channel a lot over the years, but it's January 3. It's the first episode of 2022. And we're going to have a good year this year, guys. You know what I'm saying? We have to turn this thing around. It's going to require some honesty at times. It's going to require looking the bull in the horns and saying, hey, we're not going to tolerate this kind of divisiveness anymore. We're not going to be playing your media games anymore. And I think we just need to kind of abandon the ideologies of politics. It's fool's gold. And no matter who wins, real change isn't going to happen. You know, we have to make our own. You have to build your own life, your own little kingdom, and feed your families. And again, be happy with what you have. The key to happiness in America, I said this before, is to know the difference between what you want and what you need. And if you don't make that definition and figure out, these are things I really need in life, those are things I want. If you don't clarify that, capitalism, consumption, the media will leave you wanting everything. You'll never be happy. You'll never be content. But if you can focus and know that these things I really want, I don't really need those other things. I want some of them. I don't need them. When you go to bed at night knowing you had everything you needed today, you had no reason but to be thankful and appreciative. Can I get an amen? Last record I want to talk about is Big Beat. And this is the classic Morgan Shorter, Timmons, Jamie Merritt, Blakey lineup. And again, I talk about the Jazz Messengers all the time because I think they're one of the most important bands of the 50s and 60s. And they really are the trendsetter and the pace setters for this new Black militancy and political awareness and resistance. And it'd be hard to even take the titles of a lot of those freedoms. That word's used a lot in jazz in this time. How can you not see the political context of that? The social ramification of that? You have Black men talking about freedom. You better listen to it in that music. You better think about what that word means to them, what it means to you. Because a man that's always been free can't really quantify what freedom even is. It's a man that's lived in chains for 400 years that can tell you what freedom. It gives you the moral compass. When wrong has been done to you for centuries, you are the only people in the world that can look at you square in the eye and be like, well, we've talked about this for a long time, and this is what freedom should look like. This is how we think things should be. And usually those are the most realistic ideologies of what freedom is. It's not a waving a flag. That's blindness. That's propaganda. Nationalism is propaganda. Human earthling, boy, if we all had that mindset that I'm a human earthling, and that no, you can't oppress and exploit any group of people for their resources, for their water, for their minerals, for their trees. You can't. Every group of people has entitlement to the resources, to water, education, clean air, health. These things should be an easy achievement. We spent trillions making bombers and tanks and missiles and ships. Trillions of dollars between the Axis powers, the Allies. And we can't put healthcare in everyone's laps. It's high time we recognize our entitlement and our rights as our heritage as human beings. We deserve a better life. And again, here in America, even being near the poverty line, I'm still thankful. I go to bed fed every night. I have a wife that loves me. We got heat in this place. You know, financially, it's been nip and tuck a little bit the last half year. COVID hasn't helped that at all. But I'm not going to feel sorry for myself. I appreciate everyone who's helped. I can't tell you how much I value this community. You know, thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. My wife feels the same way, you know. But I can't walk around looking like, woe is me. I didn't just get bombed out of my house not to go live in a snowfield, which a lot of Russians and Ukrainians and Poles a lot of Belgians, Czechs, it's both sides. And the men who died on both sides are innocent players in this. You know, they hate those people is, again, that's a fool's game. People are people. You got to love people. We have to find value in each other. And we share so much more in common than we have that's different about us. And a little bit of difference that exists, that's seasoning to keep it interesting. And so if you live in that mindset of my race, my religion, my people, my nation are chosen or special, and everybody else is lesser than, you're probably on the wrong channel. Because I just can't abide that foolishness, that antiquated way of thinking. And you say a lot about yourself and your education and your intellect if waving a flag is something that you think defines you and that's that important. That price of gasoline, that's who I am. Because let me tell you something, your ancestors, and usually not more than a few generations before you, came from outside those lines. You know what I mean? Your own family heritage has more precedent than the nation that you live in and that you think defines you. Nations are temporal beings. They've existed for 100, 200 years at best. Very few of us can't trace our own heritage back more than a couple hundred years. So the people that helped create you came from outside the lines that you live in right now. And oftentimes they came from places that you are now thinking is the enemy. A lot of German, Italian immigrants in America had to look at their own old ancestral home as the enemy. But people are people, and you know that your cousins and your relatives still live there, and they ain't no different than they were when you lived there. It's the governing financial bodies that need us to think this small-minded way. And again, jazz isn't separate from all this history. As I'm watching these documentaries, the timeline of jazz is interweaving with all this unfolding. And the militancy and the powerful emotional outpouring and the connection and the groove and the blues and that sorrow and how we deal with the pain. It's a real thing. And the music has the utmost importance in helping us survive tyranny. Art is a powerful, powerful tool. And if it doesn't make my life better, it will at least allow me to document for time in history how we were treated and what was wrong. And you will be held accountable someday. And the Bible is a story of an oppressed people wandering the wilderness through captivity and imprisonment and occupation, slavery. And it's those oppressed voices that ring through today that we now have a world religion based on. Well, 3 world religions based on. Which again is kind of the idiocy of this religious divide. You Jews, Christians, and Muslims all come from the same tree. That should kind of give you a little clue that if you go back far enough, there is a common ancestor for all of us. And if you're of European descent, you all come from the same branch at some point. And man, I just wanted to share. Went a little longer than I thought I was going to. Hopefully some of you made it to the end here. I just had to share that. It's been on my heart. I felt like it needed saying. And just watching those death tolls and the money spent and the lack of responsibility and recognizing when these trench warfare wasn't working, they didn't stop. They just kept marching the men out to die. And it made my stomach turn. And the aristocrats were safe back in their castles and mansions, kind of half joking about it. Shame. Shame. There'll be great sorrow on your descendants. They will pay that price. And so, hope you all enjoyed that. The power of jazz is a real thing. And it's a real magnification of the times that it was made in. And it speaks to me in such a way, it sometimes just grab me by the throat. It's an emotional sense where it's just like, man, this is such a direct response to the ugly that they live in. And this is a way of dealing with it. And again, the Beato episode about the death of rock and roll and how we lost the blues. music without that blues and that real feel of desperation becomes very temporal and has no staying power. But music that has the blues in it, in any element, if it has that sense of connection and sincerity and integrity, and it's not just some pop schmaltzy thing that's been put together, there's a real definition of staying power. Beyonce has the blues in her. Aretha Franklin has the blues in her. NSYNC, actually, they were saying the boy bands had no blues. I would say that's not totally true. They're singing some Armstrong phrasing. They're still borrowing from how the black musicians phrased, and the groove of a lot of that pop music is very rhythm and blues. So even the links in a lot of the pop music is still very much driven by the black experience and the blues. And the blues is a megaphone for the times. It's the Bible of the 20th century. And the future will know this, and will see this, and will speak on this. And what side of that story do you want to be on? What do you want your great-grandkids to look back at you and think? Were you an empathetic person? Or were you blinded and controlled? Again, I appreciate you all. Please, if you haven't subscribed to the channel. If you want to support the channel, please go to my Patreon page. Pledge a little bit of money every month. It does help me out. It gives me the time to make episodes and put stuff together. Trading cards are coming along. I had took a break for a couple days with my gig and things. I have 115 done now. So I'm over 1/7 of the way, approaching 1/6 of the way. I should have more time these next few weeks to kind of get going. I still have like 500 to go. So the light's not very bright at the end of the tunnel yet, but it's still so fun, and I'm learning so much. So I look forward to sharing that with you guys. And they're going to be really fun to make episodes around, too. That's part of the thing. That's part of what keeps driving me. Because I get some frustrating messages from people being like, oh, careful, don't do it, shouldn't do it. And I'm just going to follow my heart, do what I do. There's also a merchandise page below with lots of great Jazz Shepherd merchandise. The Jazz Facebook page, the Jazz Vinyl Club, also has some merchandise on that page if you want to grab some of that. My friend Sven Van Hooydonk from Belgium, we've actually talked about wars and looked at the pillboxes on the beaches. He did a lot of the graphic design for a lot of that stuff. So again, thank you to him. Thanks to Ken McCullough for all his support and helping expose my channel in 2021. We expect great things for this channel in 2022 and for his channel as well. We will have a new episode coming together sometime here in the next few weeks. You all be safe. Have a great day. Be blessed. And recognize how blessed you are. Be thankful for what you have. And figure out what you need and what you want. And then make that difference, because happiness will find you there. It's really a key. Talk to y'all soon. Got some fun stuff in the works. The trading cards take up a lot of time. And so it's making it harder for me to make these more extensive, in-depth episodes right now. Because if I put 10, 12 hours into putting an episode together, that's 8 hours of trading cards I didn't get to do. So I'm trying to find a nice balance there. And that's always part of the trick, is where do I focus my time and effort. But again, I'm not working right now much. And I don't sit around all day watching soap operas. So I got time to get stuff done. So it's January. Here we go. 2022, the launch. Peace.